Welcome to the Colour Trail Scarf Knitting Tutorial. This video will teach you the unique knitting technique used to make the Colour Trail Scarf, available from my Etsy shop as a yarn and pattern kit. The thicker boucle yarn used in this pattern appears to float above the knitted background of mohair. This effect is achieved by knitting a variation of the Fair Isle knitting technique. Let's get started. We begin with our background yarn, a sport weight kid mohair from the Martyrs Yarns range called Mist Mohair, and using 5mm needles, cast on 25 stitches using the long tail cast on method. See my separate video tutorial on this cast on method. Alternatively, you can cast on with another method, so long as it is a very loose cast on. I cast on to both knitting needles to obtain a loose cast on edge. And once I've finished, remove one needle, turn the work around and commence your first knit row. I knit continental style with the working end of the yarn wound around my left index finger. However, the result is the same if you knit English style, as I'm showing here, where I'm changing to English. We continue to knit 4 rows of garter stitch, that is, knit every stitch on every row for 4 rows. The entire background for this scarf is knitted in garter stitch. Now we are going to add the thicker boucle yarn. At the beginning of the 5th row, knit 2 stitches and then take the thicker yarn and, holding the mohair yarn tight behind, rest the end of the yarn over so that a tail of about 4 inches hangs over to the right, as shown here. Then continue knitting the remainder of the row. Here we are at the last stitch of the row. We turn the work to start the next row and we'll see the right side of the scarf. Next, we knit a row of garter, i.e. knit every stitch. Each right side row will be knitted in plain garter, with the movement of the boucle yarn always occurring on wrong side rows. Turn the work, and now let's move the boucle yarn along the row. We start this row, the wrong side row, by knitting the first 4 stitches. We will now be twisting the yarns around each other to form our first float. For the first few times, I recommend you take the whole ball of the boucle yarn and move it over the mist yarn in the direction of the knitting, as I'm showing you here. Adjust the float as you're going so that the boucle yarn is resting over the mohair yarn without too much slack nor too tight. Next, knit another 3 stitches and then twist the yarns around each other again in the same way as we did before, picking up the whole ball, going over from right to left in the direction of the knitting. Next, knit a few more stitches and then check the back to make sure the floats between the twists are not too tight or too loose by moving the yarn along the needles as I'm showing you here and just making small adjustments. Now continue to knit to the end of the row. You'll see that the boucle yarn is not visible at all from the wrong side of the scarf. Now turn and knit the next row in plain without any twists. Here we are at the end of this next row. And just check the tension again to make sure the 2 yarns stretch equally when pulled. Turn the work again. And now we will knit to the point in the row where the boucle yarn is sitting at the back. You'll need to check as you're going along just to see where we finished off with that yarn. Here it is. Now knit a few more stitches and we will try a quicker way of twisting. We will take the 2 yarns in your left hand and twist them around each other with the boucle yarn twisting over the mist yarn, as I'm showing you here. This is a quicker way to make the float whilst knitting a row, but does require you to untwist the yarns every 4 or 5 rows. Now continue knitting to the end of the row. The front of your work should look like this now. Next we're going to move the boucle yarn in a vertical direction up the work. We do this by knitting 3 rows of plain garter stitch with no twisting. Once these 3 rows have been knitted, we knit back to the point where we left the boucle yarn and twist it around the mohair yarn directly above where we last twisted it. And twist it in the direction you are knitting, as shown here. Then knit to the end of the row. You will see that the boucle yarn has now moved in a vertical direction up the scarf. Here you can see we have knitted a few more rows, moving the boucle yarn to the very edge of the scarf. To create the small loops at the edge of the scarf, we knit 3 plain rows of garter stitch, and then at the end of the next wrong side row, bring the boucle yarn back into the scarf, going over the second last stitch, as I'm demonstrating here. Leave a small loop and make sure you twist the yarns around each other in the opposite direction to the one we have been doing so far, and then knit the last stitch. The next row will be a right side row, so we simply knit it without any twisting, as we've done before. The next section of knitting will involve moving the boucle yarn from left to right along a row. Please note that you will only be able to move one float of 3 stitches at a time when moving the boucle yarn in this direction. This is because you always knit from right to left. You can make adjustments for this limitation by moving the floats in various directions as shown in this part of the scarf. Experiment with different patterns as you gain confidence with this technique, but just remember to twist the boucle yarn over the mohair yarn in the direction in which you want it to travel. Thank you for watching. If you wish to purchase yarn and pattern kits for this fun knitting technique, please visit my Etsy shop at the link shown here. And if you're interested in learning more about knitting, please visit and subscribe to my Knit with Pat YouTube channel, or if you wish to weave, subscribe to my Weave with Pat YouTube channel.